A Tale for the Time Being. Novel by Ruth Ozeki. Now, making the decision to end my life really helped me lighten up, and suddenly all the stuff my old Jiko had told me about the time being really kicked into focus. There's nothing like realizing that you don't have much time left to stimulate your appreciation for the moments of your life. I mean, it sounds corny, but I started to really experience stuff for the first time, like the beauty of the plum and cherry blossoms along the avenues in Ueno Park, when the trees are in bloom. I spent whole days there, wandering up and down these long, soft tunnels of pink clouds and gazing overhead at the fluffy blossoms, all puffy and pink with little sparkles of sunlight and blue sky glinting between the bright green leaves. Time disappeared, and it was like being born into the world all over again. Everything was perfect. When a breeze blew, petals rained down on my upturned face, and I stopped and gasped, stunned by the beauty and sadness. For the first time in my life, I had a project and a goal to focus on. I had to figure out everything I wanted to accomplish in my remaining time on Earth, and that's how I came to realize that I wanted to write down old Jiko's life story. Jiko was so wise and interesting, and now, when I think about how I failed in my goal to tell her story, I want to cry. The reason I was spending my days in Ueno Park, getting lost in the blossoms, was because Babette was still pissed off at me, and of course, I still wasn't going to school. I hadn't been back since I shaved my head and found my superpower, and mostly I just felt a huge sense of relief, but now that the school year was almost over, I also felt some regret. I'd taken my high school entrance exams like I'd promised my mom, and I really blew it. The minute I sat down at my seat, I knew I was in trouble. The examination room was incredibly hot and crammed with rows of jittery kids in uniforms, stinking of teenage sweat and polyester. You could almost see the smog of pheromones in the air, turning my juicy, interesting brain into lead. Dense, heavy, inert. All I wanted to do was to put my head down on the desktop and sleep. It turned out I knew a lot of the material, after all, especially in the English section, but I didn't even bother to answer most of the questions. My scores were so low it was a joke, like I was mentally handicapped or something, but I was like, whatever. It didn't bother me a lot, but it bothered me a little, knowing that I would never go to high school and learn all the things that my great-uncle Haruki #1 had learned before he died. I mean, you could say what's the point in learning stuff if you're only going to kill yourself, and that's true, but there is something noble about the effort some people put into trying. Like old Jiko's superhero, Konosuke, who continued to study English and write in her diary, right up until the day they hanged her. I think she is a good role model, even if she did try to assassinate the emperor with a bomb. Anyway, now that I knew my time on Earth was limited, I didn't want to waste my precious moments with any more stupid dates, and this really pissed Babette off. She said that I was taking up valuable table space at Fifi's, and that my scribbling was bringing the mood down. I tried to convince her that having a writer there made the place feel more authentic, like a real French cafe, but she disagreed, and then finally she gave me an ultimatum. Either go on a date or get out. Fine. Whatever. That was yesterday. She flounced away and I kept on writing, watching her out of the corner of my eye. She started talking to a customer at one of the nearby tables, and the guy turned around to look at me, and I couldn't believe it, but it was that creepy hentai I mentioned at the beginning. The one with the greasy hair and the bad complexion who liked to watch me pull up my socks. He's a regular, but he seemed like just a peeper, and not like the type who would actually have enough cash to pay for a date. Babette was doing a real sales job on him now, which actually I found kind of insulting if you want to know the truth. I mean, I'm a fairly adorable 16-year-old girl in a school uniform. You'd think he would be happy to be given the chance to date me, right? Finally he took out his wallet and handed Babette some money. Babette folded up the bills and tucked the roll between her tits and then glanced over at me. Date, she mouthed. Sighing, I closed my diary and followed her out into the courtroom, where she fished out the thin wad of cash, peeled off a few bills, and handed them to me. I looked at her, surprised. She shrugged. Rayu spoiled you, she said. It's time you got realistic. I'm not doing it for this, I said, handing back the bills. I have some self-respect, you know. Her smile spread, slow and dangerous, across her cute doll face. She backed me up against the wall of coats and grabbed me by the chin, digging her knuckle deep into the soft part where the jawbone makes a V, just above the throat. I gagged on the pain, which was sick-making. That's amusing, she said. People like you don't deserve to have self-respect. So you better get over it. She took my cheeks in both hands and pinched so hard that my eyes filled with tears. She pulled me toward her until my forehead was almost touching hers, and her two eyes became one, a single hideous eye, dark and glittering, surrounded by ruffles and lace. You're lucky I'm generous and sharing with you at all, she said. The trouble with you is that you're too American. You're lazy and selfish. You should learn to be loyal and work hard. She gave my face one last hard shake and released me. I fell back against the coats and slumped down the wall. She cocked her head and looked me over, and then she reached down and stroked my burning cheek. So pink, she said. So pretty. And then she slapped me. She located my data's coat and threw it at me. Have fun, she said, pivoting so neatly that her petticoats lifted, and from where I was sitting on the floor I could see the frill of her panties as she flounced out the door. I don't remember the henty's name. Maybe I never knew it. He was waiting for me in the reception area by the nude lady in the fountain. I handed him his coat. He took it and didn't even look me in the eye. He mumbled something that I didn't quite catch and walked out, expecting me to follow. The tiny elevator was empty, and we stood there awkwardly, watching the doors close, not knowing what to say or how to make conversation. A few floors down, the doors opened again, and a big, happy party pushed in, laughing and drunk, and suddenly I was jammed up against him. I could feel his sore breath on the back of my neck as he groped underneath my skirt, pushing against me from behind. I wanted to scream, chicken. Like you're supposed to do on the subway when some perv starts fondling you, but I stopped myself. He'd paid, after all, and if he wanted to get a head start, what could I say? When the elevator doors opened and everyone got out, he held his overcoat in front of his pants and stumbled down the street, glancing back every couple of steps to make sure I was still following. I could have slipped away, but I didn't. I just followed because he'd paid, and that was the honorable thing to do. I couldn't believe how pathetic he was, but I had no self-respect, so it didn't matter. He had no social skills to speak of. He didn't offer to buy me a cute sweater or a kite. He didn't offer me a drink, and the kind of hotel he took me to didn't even have a minibar. There was no champagne, no brandy, just a vending machine in the hall with cans of beer and one cup sake. One cup sake reminded me of my dad because that's what he'd been drinking the night he fell onto the tracks in front of the Cho Rapid Express. It was totally depressing, but my so-called date was too cheap to buy me one, anyway. If you don't mind, I'd rather not go into a lot of detail about what happened next because just thinking about it makes me feel sad and sick, and I haven't even had time to take a bath yet. Let's just say that the bed wasn't round and it didn't have a zebraskin cover, but the rest of my imagining was pretty accurate. When we got to the room, he didn't waste any time, and while he did things to my body, I just went to the silent frozen place in my mind that was clean and cold and very far away. And really I don't remember very much, only that partway through, I was lying on my stomach when my keytest started to ring, and I drifted back to this world just enough to wonder who was phoning me. I thought maybe it was Jiko, and the tears started leaking out of my eyes because I knew how sad she would feel if she could see me now, and I missed her and wanted to talk to her so badly. Then the thought occurred to me that maybe she knew I was in trouble, and that's why she was calling, and maybe right now she was clicking her juzu beads and saying prayers for my well-being. And maybe the sound of the phone ringing actually did save me, because thinking of Jiko made me realize that I didn't want to end up being one of those girls who the police have to find on the floor days later, because that would break her heart. And if you live to be 104, you don't deserve to have your heart broken by your careless great-granddaughter. And just at that moment, my date did something that hurt so much, the pain shocked me back into my body, and I heard myself cry out, and then I reacted. I pushed him off me long enough to twist out from under. Rayu had taught me how sometimes men enjoy a little izime, so I summoned up my superpower and pushed the henty down onto his back, and then I straddled him and started smacking him hard across the face. And wouldn't you know it, he was delighted. I used his belt to tie his wrists together, and I didn't even have to hurt him too much to get him off. It's amazing how quickly a man can turn from a sado into a maso. I know what old Zico would say. Sado, maso, same thing. As soon as he fell asleep, I got up and checked my phone, and sure enough, the call was from her. She knew and she had saved me. But when I read the text message, I saw that it wasn't from Jiko, after all. It was from Muji. Just one line. I read it, but I couldn't take in the meaning. I read it again. I stood there in the middle of the tacky mirrored room, staring at the little screen. My so-called date was snoring on the bed. I looked up and caught sight of a naked girl in the mirrors, endlessly reflecting. Her body was raw-looking, gawky and awkward. I hugged myself and the girl did, too. I started to cry and we couldn't stop. I turned away from her and quietly gathered up my school uniform and put it on. I tiptoed over to the pile of clothes belonging to my date and quickly went through his pockets. I emptied his wallet and took the last remaining bills. I bundled his clothes up into a ball and forced myself to stop crying long enough to turn the doorknob. As I slipped out of the room and the door clicked behind me, I heard him call. I started to run. I pictured him frantically searching for his clothes, so I dumped them in the stairwell at the end of the hallway. I could have taken them with me and thrown them on the street, but I didn't need to. I guess I'm a nice person at heart. When I got outside, I kept running, cutting through the crowded narrow alleys of Electricity Town. Akiba at dusk is really something, a huge, strobing hallucination of neon lights and giant manga action heroes that loom down at you like they're going to crush your head. And then there's the noise, the crazy jangle of the pachinko parlors and game arcades, and the screaming hawkers and kyakuhiki calling out to the drunken salarymen and tourists and otku who merge and swell like plankton in the sea. Usually I love it. Usually I feed off all that energy, but you have to be in the right mood, and I wasn't. I pushed through the crowds, keeping my face down to hide the tears. All I wanted was to get home to my dad. I needed my dad. I needed to tell him that Jiko was dying, so he would drop everything and take me to the station, and together we would catch the next express train bound for Sendai. And since it was night and the buses wouldn't be running, we could take a taxi all the way from the station up to the temple. We could be there in no time at all. Maybe 5 or 6 hours. And when we arrived, everything would be peaceful and quiet, and Muji would come running out to greet us and tell us that Jiko was fine, and it was all just a false alarm, and she was so sorry for calling us and disturbing us for no reason, but now that we were here, would we like to have a bath? This was what I wanted. To find my dad, to know Jiko was fine, and to take a bath. I concentrated on these thoughts on the train, all the way to my stop, keeping my head down and wiping my nose with the cuff of my uniform sleeve. The apartment was quiet when I got home. Tadema, I said softly. My voice sounded hoarse from all the crying. There was no answer, which was not unusual if my dad was on the internet and couldn't hear me. I wondered if my mom was still at work. Had Muji phoned them? Maybe they'd already left for Sendai without me. Dad? I heard the toilet flush, and then a shaft of light cut across the darkened hallway as the washroom door opened. I took off my shoes and stepped up into the entryway. There was a shopping bag from the local supermarket on the floor, in the place where we put things we don't want to forget. I opened the bag and looked inside, and then I closed it and walked toward the light. I found him in the bedroom, dressed in his dark blue suit, neatly shaved and putting on his socks. Dad? His bony feet looked sickly white. He looked up. Oh, he said. Now go. I didn't hear you come in. He was looking right through me, and his voice was flat and lifeless. He bent down to adjust the sock. You're home early, he said. You're not going out with your school friends tonight? Wow. He still believed I had school friends. That shows you how clueless he was. I watched him from the doorway. There was something strange about him, even stranger than usual, like he had turned into a zombie. Where's Mom? I asked. Jungyo, he said. He stood and straightened out his trousers. Are you going out or something? Yes, he said, sounding a little surprised. He was even wearing a tie. It was the tie I bought for him that first Christmas, when he was still pretending to have a job. It wasn't silk, but it had a nice butterfly pattern on it. Where are you going? To meet a friend, he said. Someone from my university days. We're going to have a drink for old time's sake. I won't be long. He spoke the words like he'd written them down and memorized them. Did he really think I'd believe that? Zombie Dad was putting on his suit jacket. Did anybody call? I asked. He shook his head. No, he put his wallet in his suit pocket, and then he paused and frowned. Why? Were you expecting someone? It figured. Muji was such a space case, and besides, she knew he never answered the phone. No, I just wondered. I studied him as he stood there. He looked okay in his suit. It was a cheap, ugly suit, but it was better than the dirty old trainer he wore in the house. I followed him out into the hallway and watched as he used the shoehorn to slide his heel into his loafer. Don't forget your bag, I said. He reached for it automatically, and then he froze. What bag? Pretending like he was confused. Like he didn't know. That one, I said, pointing to the bag next to the door. Oh. Right. Yes. Of course. He picked up the bag and glanced at me, and I could tell he was wondering if I'd looked inside. I turned away and went into the kitchen. Ittekimasu, he called, but there was a catch in his voice, like he wasn't sure. Ittekimasu is what you say when you know you're coming back. That's literally what it means, I'm going and I'm coming back. When somebody says ittekimasu to you, you're supposed to answer itterashai, which means, yes, please go and come back. But I couldn't say it. I stood next to the sink with my back to the door, picturing him standing there with his shopping bag full of charcoal briquettes and his Nick Drake songs. Time has told me. Day is done. He must have thought I hadn't heard him the first time, because he said it again, ittekimasu. Why didn't he just leave? A moment later, the door clanged shut. Liar, I whispered, under my breath. That was last night. I didn't need my dad after all. I caught the last train to Sendai and then transferred to the local and managed to get to the town closest to the temple. The buses had stopped running for the night, but even with the henty's money, I didn't have enough for a taxi up the coastline to Jiko's village, so I sat on a bench in the dinky little station and waited. I thought about calling the temple. I could imagine how the ringing of the phone would break the deep, dark silence of the night, and it seemed wrong, so I texted instead. I knew nobody would answer, and I really felt like talking to someone, so I wrote all these pages to you. I knew you wouldn't answer, either. I guess I fell asleep then. The sky was just turning grey when the station master woke me up and showed me where to catch the bus. I got a hot can of coffee from the vending machine, and now I'm waiting here for the first bus to come. I tried calling the temple, but nobody's answering, so I don't know what's going on there. I hope Jiko's okay. I hope she isn't dead already. I hope she waits for me. I'm praying. Can't you hear me praying? I know this is stupid. I know you don't exist and no one is ever going to read this. I'm just sitting here on this stupid bus stop bench, drinking a can of too sweet coffee, pretending that I have a friend to write to. But the fact is, you're a lie. You're just another stupid story I made up out of thin air because I was lonely and needed someone to spill my guts to. I wasn't ready to die yet and needed a raison d'etre. I shouldn't be mad at you, but I am. Because now you're letting me down, too. The fact is, I'm all alone. I should have known better. I knew when I started this diary that I couldn't keep it up, because in my heart of hearts, I never believed in your existence. How could I? Everyone I believed in is dying. My old Zico is dying, my dad is probably already dead by now, and I don't even believe in myself anymore. I don't believe I exist, and soon I won't. I am a time being about to expire. Babette was right. I am selfish, and I only cared about my own stupid life, just like my dad only cared about his own stupid life, and now I've gone and wasted all these beautiful pages and failed to achieve my goal, which was to write about Zico and her fascinating life while I still had time, before she died. And now it's too late. Talk about Thames Pardue. I'm sorry my dear old Zico. I love you, but I screwed up. It's cold. The blossoms in front of the station have mostly fallen, and the ones still clinging to the branches of the trees are an ugly shade of brown. There's an old man in a blue and white jogging suit sweeping the petals from the sidewalk in front of his pickle shop. He doesn't see me. The station master is opening the station doors. He knows I'm here, but he doesn't look at me. A dirty white dog is licking its balls across the street. An old farmer woman with a blue and white tenugui on her head is bicycling by. Nobody sees me. Maybe I'm invisible. I guess this is it. This is what now feels like.